Hello. Hi there. I'm Nicole Ann with Holistic Vitality, and I wanted to share some perspective that came through a recent client shamanic journey, but also some of the themes of what I'm particularly going to discuss of that journey. Also relates to another client's as well in similarity in what was learned. And so I kind of want to share some of those perspectives. But before I do, I just want to kind of give you a preview as to why I'm going to go into that. And the backdrop would be what it is that I facilitate. So, for those of you that have not worked with me before or are unfamiliar with what I post, I facilitate shamanic journey healing work. And how that works is I lead my clients' consciousness into an out of body space where they can access what's considered the higher dimensional realms. And once they connect to that space, is where really anything is possible to explore, to heal, to address, to learn. And it's really in regards to the intentions that that person had set up prior to that journey, before leading them into journey, which could be questions that they would like answered from a higher perspective to gain clarity, or perhaps it's things they're trying to resolve, such as trauma or things that may be affecting them in their life that have a genesis and a point of origin, if you will. Now, that point of origin could be this lifetime, especially regarding one's own childhood of this incarnation. But sometimes some of that healing might be needed even in the womb, or say past life healing and whatnot. So really anything is possible in regards to how or what one is seeking, and what therefore may unfold in their journey as to where that may take them. So I'm essentially the facilitator and the one that helps them navigate that experience to not only connect, but also how to get the most out of that experience once they are connected in regards to those intentions. So in regards to the intentions for my video today, I had a recent client who wanted some clarity on a lot of things. And one of the things that this particular video is in regards to is regarding childhood trauma. And she wanted to get to the bottom of, like, not only where did her injury, she had a shoulder injury as a child, and she has no memory or recollection of it. Um, and on top of that, she also experienced losing her voice, and where she said that she used to sing as a child, and then after, said accident, it was like she went shy and never really sang very much again. And so she was wondering if the two were related, the accident and that. And another thing she had brought up was that one of her family members had mentioned that, it may have involved a sexual trauma as a child. So she didn't want to necessarily adopt that storyline if it wasn't, in fact, her truth. And so one of the things she wanted to explore was what was valid of that. And so she actually ended up channeling an archangel, and meaning this archangel ended up communicating through her, speaking through her, and in response to her intentions and her questions that she was seeking clarity on. So when I brought up this portion of it for inquiry as to, like, what happened to her as a child, and the reason also why I'm sharing this perspective, and I have her permission to share it, but also the fact that I'm sharing it is to also kind of protect her anonymity. filtered through my perspective of what was received in that transmission. So when it came to asking that, he basically said that it was not important, the details, and it was not important for her to go into the details of what happened to her in that experience. But what he did confirm, and I'll go into why I find this perspective is also pretty fascinating, is because he said that she did have a run-in with a man, and there was trauma involved, sexual trauma involved. He said, although it was short-lived, it was it did have something to do with her losing her voice, because she agreed as a child that she would not say anything. And she did that, partially because of fear, but also because she wanted to protect her sibling, her brother, and the other kids that were in that environment from having that same experience with this man. And, but she had no memory of it. And what this archangel was saying is that it was by design that she did not remember, because it was her guides and her higher self that thought it was in her best interest to protect her from the memory of that experience, from one, further traumatizing her, not only from the sake of remembering it, but two, because her actual family support was not strong enough to be able to help guide her through what had happened to her. And that specifically would have created much more trauma, that she would have not had the appropriate assistance to help her navigate that particular experience. So I found that to be pretty fascinating, because that also correlates to another client's experience where she had a similar realization in just that, where we have our higher self, or our beings of light that would want to protect us from a trauma to create that amnesiac like experience, because it was obviously, as a child, it's very traumatizing, especially if something sexually would have happened to you, because that should never happen to any kid. Unfortunately, it must also be mentioned that I hear so many of these types of stories, as majority or many of the clients that I have worked with have confided in having sexual trauma as a child. Now, obviously, there's specific situations, and who was involved and what happened, etc., is obviously unique to each person. But I find it quite appalling that I'm hearing this so often, to the point where one could even be considered desensitized, because you almost expect it. Now, the other thing that's really, I guess, pertaining to that is, like, if I'm hearing so many of these stories, why is it not something that we openly talk about? You don't hear people talking about this very often, and I think it's because it's usually the child in many of these scenarios that was a victim. And oftentimes, similarly to this particular client, you can lose your voice, not only the shame and blame, if you recall that experience, that you take with you into your adulthood, and how that then continues to create patterns of more trauma that you attract into your experience, because of perhaps that unresolved childhood trauma. Now, everybody to a certain extent may have different types of trauma, but in this case, I'm referring to sexual trauma. But also tells you that, from what I'm understanding, and of course, many of my clients are channeling, so I am receiving more of that perspective as to this is a bigger problem, and it is affecting many, many children globally, right? And so I'm obviously hearing it on the front lines with my clients. But I wanted to kind of then bring that similar perspective into the other client that had the particular realization regarding being protected with amnesia, if you will, from her experience. So for her, she was aware something had happened, but she wasn't quite sure what it was. Because similarly, she didn't have memory of what exactly took place. In her case, she was a younger teen, so it wasn't quite a child, but younger teen, and had an experience with a friend that been staying in a hotel, and this experience evolved with a friend needed to invite her mom's boyfriend down to deliver her some items that she had forgotten, and she was staying with this client in the hotel, and while her and the parents were on a vacation. So, anyways, I'll share some of the details because I think it quite. I don't know. I'll share what I feel like I can share. So, anyways, the boyfriend and another gentleman, I'll say gentleman, and I use that term loosely because I don't really think that applies to them. But anyways, two men show up. One of them's the mom's boyfriend to her friend, and next thing you know, they're having a makeout session, and the other guy is like, "Here, let's go for a drive. Let's give them some privacy." Totally weird, right? Anyways, she leaves. They're talking in the car. They're gone for maybe an hour or so, and he gives her some water. And because she did smoke some weed or whatever, drank some water, and they go back in. And the next thing you know, she doesn't remember anything until the next morning and notices her panties and it was off. Right? There's something wrong down there, but she did not have any memory of what took place. Well, in her shamanic journey, she ended up connecting to her grandfather that is since deceased, and he basically was saying, "I am so sorry that I couldn't be there for you to protect you from what had happened to you. But in order for us to heal this, we have to go back and you have to see what these monsters did so that you can take your power back." And so her grandfather is her guide in this journey, and he takes her back to the memory, and she saw what these men did to her and how they derived pleasure out of doing that to this young girl. And but what she also noticed is that it wasn't exclusive to the human, meaning she did notice that there was reptilian beings that were operating through those perpetrators, doing that to her, and they were really the ones that were getting all this satisfaction out of, evil, if you will, and stealing and robbing someone's innocence. And that's what I really feel like is more what it comes down to. It's not just the human, it's the entities that are operating through that human, which they end up targeting, from what we've learned, is children, psychic children, especially because they get that psychic power from that Lucia energy that is released, and the fear and all of that, that is released. And then so they target innocence, and especially light workers and psychics. And so usually they are prone or prey to these evil entities, if you will, that are operating through the human perpetrator. Which, think about it, usually there's a reason why one might become a perpetrator, and at some point it would mean they were likely to have been the victim before they became that perpetrator. So what also kind of came through in the channeling with the first client was to try to have compassion even for the dark ones, because these entities do feed off of fear and or hate, and even if the hate is directed at or towards them, once you are aware of their involvement. So they said it is important in the abuser, the person too. So it is important to, I guess, steer away from this bringing out hate and disgust in you. I mean, obviously, disgust is hard not to be disgusted when you hear these kinds of stories, and I am privy to these particular experiences. But Anyway, so going back to her experience, her grandfather's like, okay, we need to go back to the situation of when this happened to you. And he showed her, she saw these entities, and he said, okay, now it's time that you got to take your power back. So she ended up doing, we helped her work through that, where she took her power back, and these beings no longer had a hold over her energy of what they had robbed from her. But what her grandfather revealed to her was that they purposely helped her forget that experience, because he said that she had always had this sense that something had happened to her, but she didn't know what it was. And she had a couple of attempts on her life where she tried to take her own life, but he said that she was unsuccessful. However, had she remembered actually what did take place to her, she would have been successful in taking her own life. And so I know these are heavy subjects, and I apologize, but I feel like it's just really important to share. Um, so one second. So yeah, so it's really, I feel like it's really important to talk about this and to share this, because like I said, I am hearing so many stories that there's, from people that have been victims to such trauma, that leads me to also believe that there are many, obviously more, that have that experience where something bad happened to them in childhood. And in this case, in this particular tough subject, would be regarding sexual trauma. And it is important to heal that, and break that karma, and to resolve it. So, um, in order for me to feel like I'm doing my due diligence, I want to share um, this perspective with you, as you may resonate with this. And perhaps you do remember what happened to you and know that it causes these problems. But for some in these experiences, they didn't know what exactly happened. There may have been a feeling that it could be their truth, but didn't really get that resolved, and it's because maybe they had that amnesia. And if that is the case, it could be this similar circumstance where your guides or your higher self was trying to protect you from that memory, if that is in fact your truth. Now, that's not everybody's truth, but I just wanted to make this perspective available if you resonate. Uh, if you resonate with this content, and therefore knowing that there is ways that you can process your healing, if so, which I am one of those individuals that is of service to you, and I can facilitate remotely if you resonate and would like to address, or anything's really possible. But in this case, obviously I'm speaking to childhood trauma, and it's really therefore important to access the genesis of that timeline of what took place, so you can essentially retrieve your inner child self and bring them forward with you, so that they are no longer fragmented in the state of the original trauma timeline, and essentially follows you around, kind of like this shadow wounding in you, and of course makes you a byproduct match to undesirable more experiences in your reality by virtue of how that was internalized for you. So just so you know, that is available through shamanic journey work. And of course, there might be other practitioners or healers or facilitators out there that you may resonate if this is your particular scenario. But I just wanted to bring light to what I've recently learned, and also been able to connect the dot with how those two perspectives coincided. Yeah, and that's pretty much mostly what I wanted to share in this particular video, and I look forward to sharing some of the actual channeled content that has come through some of my recent clients, and I think you guys would find that all very interesting, and we learned a lot, but these were just a little bit more too sensitive topics that I felt to share through their channeling. And so I just wanted to kind of regurgitate some of those details and, of course, leave them the anonymity of that client intact. So thank you. And I hope you got something from this um, transmission and this information. And I hope you have a good day.